Hello, my name is Omid Safi. I am a professor of Iranian and Islamic Studies at Duke University, and I'm delighted to share this important and timely conversation with you. The conversation this evening is going to be asking a deceptively simple question. How is it that so many Iranian Americans come to self-identify as white in both social settings and in government forms? This is particularly an important and timely question with the census that is taking place this year and the lack of any obvious categories that would seem to correspond to Iranians and our identity. So during the time that we have, we're going to be taking a look at the ways that the conversation about the issue of race takes us from Iran and the particular rise of certain nationalistic debates in the context of the 20th century and brings us over to the United States and the ambiguities of who can legally be classified as white. The conversation is not too dissimilar to previous conversation that Mediterranean communities like Italians, Syrians, Lebanese, Palestinians, at a different time, Irish and Jews have also undergone. In the case of Iran, it also brings into play the particular dynamic of the conversation there. As I've shared this with my own family, the conversation here is a little personal for me. When I came to enroll at my current university, Duke University, as a 17-year-old first-year student, I was sent a form to fill out. And the racial classifications were white, black, Asian, Pacific Islander, and a couple of other ones, and then an other. And my mom, who may be watching this, in fact, said, well, just check white. And, you know, like a very proud brown person, I said, I will never check the white box. Incidentally, the religion box was also equally complicated. There was A through Z, First Baptist, Second Baptist, Third Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian, Jewish, Buddhist, Hindu, Baha'i. There was no box for Muslim. So when I got my form back, it said, Omid Safi, welcome to the Duke class of 1992. You are, based on your own categorization, racially an other and religiously an other non-Protestant. So nothing to make you feel welcomed into a place like being an other. And the same kind of dynamic takes place at a level of culture and at the level of politics, so much so that this has become something of a joke for many Iranian Americans. One rather prominent Iranian American comic, Maz Jobrani, has even gone and made a whole routine based on this, which we're going to take a look.
Hi. Hello. Hi.
Mr. Rishparvar?
Yes.
آقای علافزاده؟
Yeah, can be. Doctor. دانشمند مهم.
شما ایرانی هستی؟
بله. حال شما خوبه؟
خوبم. I'm from the U.S. Census Bureau.
Oh, yes, I've heard of the census.
Yeah. And I'm here because you didn't fill out your forms.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was very busy.
So I'm going to talk you through the questions, and when I get to the question about race, I suggest you tell me to write Iranian-American or Iranian.
Is there a box for Iranian-American?
No, there's no box, but I will check other and then write in Iranian-American.
We are white, just put white. There's a box for white.
Technically that's true, but that's not going to help us be counted.
Oh,
So,
is there benefit?
potentially gives Iranians minority status. Persian-speaking nurses. And federal funding for our community.
Who does this information go to?
Oh, all this information is private and strictly confidential. So,
I don't know about that one.
okay, let's go.
Let's
do
go.
this.
Where do you want to go? Go ahead, I'm just joking. talking to you.
So, how many people live in this household?
0.
What's the annual income range?
0.
What's your phone number? Let me guess. 000.
No. 310 000
Just curious, what's your favorite movie then?
Zora.
Sir.
Hi, how are you? How are you?
Sir, okay. Last question.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I need to sleep.
Yeah, you do. Okay, so your race?
Italian. They call me dottore. That's Italian for doctor. Dottore.
Remember what we talked about?
Always wanted to be Italian. بزن Italian اسمم بذار فرانکی. My friends they call me come here, like Italian, like come here. How are you? I'm Italian. Come here, come.
All right, so let's come back over here. So what's really going on here? With the case of many Iranians, even understanding the phenotype diversity that surely exists among many Iranians, generally they have deemed to be too white to qualify for governmental protection against discrimination against racial minorities, but not white enough at the same time to protect them from the kind of racist attacks that bigots and white supremacists and xenophobes and others would commit. This constant balance of too white and not white enough in some ways has come to characterize the experience of a lot of Iranians. So let's take a look at what we have going on here. And we're going to be taking a look at one of the common movies that was made not too long ago, the so-called Prince of Persia. And of course, they couldn't get a handsome Iranian actor to play it, but Jake Gyllenhaal ended up playing the title role. Remember, in the words of Edward Said, culture is always about politics. And some prominent Iranian Americans said, well, this movie is set in antiquity, and if you go back 1700 years, all Iranians looked like Jake Gyllenhaal. Not so sure about that, and not so sure of what we actually know about what Iranians looked like 2,000 years ago. There is a Hollywood movie that has been under discussion about the prominent Persian poet Maulana Rumi. And the common discussion has been that they want to get Leonardo DiCaprio, fairly clearly a white person, to play Rumi, which led many Iranians, also Turks and Pakistanis and Indians, to start a Twitter campaign, hashtag Rumi wasn't white. In the current census form, these are some of the options that we get. And if you look under the option for white, you see German, Irish, English, Italian, Lebanese, or Egyptian, Black or African American, American Indian, or Alaskan. The reason that in the census video that you saw, people were asked to self-identify as Iranian was to have an accurate measure of the representation of Iranians and to be able to use that as political clout to qualify for federal funding and what have you. This has even led some Iranian Americans to start campaigns asking Iranians to self-identify, not as white, but as Iranian on official census forms. And yet, Iranians rank quite high in terms of percentage of people from the Middle East and North Africa who routinely self-identify as white. Based on this one measure, 85% of Iranians. This is a little bit of a generational issue, as the Iranian immigrants who tended to come to the United States around the time of the revolution tend to be much more likely to self-identify as white, and their children who have grown up and have come to political consciousness in a post 9/11 world tend to be much quicker to identify as a person of color or even brown. This leads us to certain campaigns. Yalla count. Check it right, you ain't white. So we kind of want to move from here now to the discussion about the complexities of Iran. So to begin with, we want to have the obvious conversation that the category of Iran and Persian are not coterminous. Not everybody in Iran is Persian. You also have communities, as you see in this wonderful chart, that are Azeri, Kurdish, Arab-speaking, Luri, Baluch, Qashqai, Turkmen, Gilaki, and so on. And religiously, of course, Iran is not homogeneous. While the overwhelming majority of Iranians today are Muslim, historically, we have also had time periods in which the majority of the population was Zoroastrian and Christian, and Iran has always been home to a significant Jewish population. And at the same time, not all Persians and aspects of Persian culture has historically taken place within the confine of the modern nation state of Iran. Places that today are outside Iranian national boundaries like Samarkand and Bukhara, Herat, not to mention places in South Asia like Delhi, have at different points and times been centers of Persian culture. Now, Iranians love their language, and the Master Webster of Iran was an important linguist by the name of De Khuda. De Khuda was so beloved that at some point he even ran for prime minister of Iran. He offers in his massive dictionary, which many people come to identify as the single largest dictionary ever written by one person, he talks about the etymology of the word Iran, how the origin that it has in pre-Islamic language. And on the panel on the left, you see that in the middle of the second millennia before the time of Christ, a group of white-skinned people, he says, crossed the Jehun, the Oxus River, and the Caucasus Mountains to enter the Iranian plateau. Now, that's very interesting to be talking about white people 2,000 years before the time of Christ. So let's see where that idea comes from. Well, it turns out that when you go to historic places in Iran, like Nakhsh Rustam, there are Pahlavi language inscriptions which speak of Iran as the land of the Arya people. And the word Arya simply seems to have meant the nobles. So for example, in Nakhsh Rustam, we have King Darius and Darius and Xerxes, being identified as a Hakhameneshi, a Persian, son of a Persian, and Arya of an Arya background. A noble one, son of a noble one. Interestingly enough, in no pre-Islamic Persian text does the word Arya seem to refer to a master race that extends from Iran to Europe, the way that it would come to be understood in later European thought. That kind of an association is something that we begin to see growing in Iran in the 20th century under the rule of Reza Shah, who establishes the Pahlavi dynasty consisting of himself and his son Muhammad Reza Shah. Reza Shah participates in close alliances with Germany, and we'll talk about that for a reason. And the German scholars that come to Iran under the invitation of Reza Shah are asked to help Iran identify quintessential Iranian identity, right? The Hoveyet Iranian. And so they offer us some explanations. Historic buildings and heritages are plenty, but since the Aryan tribes, or more precisely because of them, this country is called Iran Shahr, and the ancient heritage of Iran dates back from that period. So starting in this early 20th century context, we begin to see a German-inflicted Iranian articulation of what it means to be an Iranian, which says, what it really is to be a true Iranian has not been the heritage of Rumi and Hafiz and Sadi or Tosi, Nizami, Omar Khayyam, Baba Tahir, all the great, extraordinary Persian poets and mystics and philosophers, Ibn Sina and others. Real Iranian identity is before the coming of Islam. So you have to go back to the time before the Arab invasion and the conversion of Iran into a Muslim country. This time period also sees the building of wholesale monuments in Iran built in that Zoroastrian, Sasanian, we call this Neo-Sasanian architecture, such as the tombs of Ferdowsi and others, as if these are ancient monuments. And many modern Iranians who go to these buildings at times assume that they're visiting ancient monuments. One could draw an analogy to Confederate monuments, which are not, in fact, from the pre-Civil War era, but the majority of them are built in the 1910s and 20s and 30s. So the architecture, the landscape of Iran begins to change at some point, and Reza Shah even attempts and fails to establish a project to purge the Persian language of foreign vocabulary. It's an attempt to identify a quote-unquote pure Persian language. Of course, this is not really possible since 40% of Persian vocabulary comes from Arabic. We couldn't say salam or khudafiz without Arabic words, nor would we even know of our extraordinary sages like Hafiz and Sadi and Maulana and others. What I find so interesting is that the mission that this Farhangistan, this culture house, is given is پیراستن زبان فارسی از الفاظ نامتناسب. It's to purify and purge the Persian language from inappropriate vocabulary. But what is identified as inappropriate in this context is Arabic. The same time period sees the wholesale introduction of vocabulary first from French and then from English into Persian. And at no point are those words seen to be inappropriate because after all, they're European, they're Farangi. So one has to really start to notice that what is at stake here is not so much purging and purifying the Persian language, because if that were the case, you would equally object to French words. It is rather an attempt to de-Arabize. European is okay, Arabic is not, according to this understanding. So what is going on in this context? Why are Iranians becoming more friendly in the 1930s towards Germany? Well, while Iran is never full-on colonized, Iran is under zones of influence. The Russians are pushing south from the north. The Brits are trying to control the southeast part of Iran in order to have access to the crown jewel that they have in India. And Iranians look at the Middle East and they find that the Russians, the English, and the French, they're all colonizing different places. The Germans are reserving their vitriol and animosity inside their own borders. So Germany seems to be a friendlier ally than the Russians or the English or French. So Reza Shah turns to first Ataturk, the Turkish ruler, for a sense of forming this Iranian identity in the same kind of a project that Ataturk is doing. And then there's the beginning of a friendship with Hitler. There are pictures and letters exchanged back and forth between them, including this famous one from Hitler, signed to, with best wishes, to Reza Shah Pahlavi. We're going to want to explore how do the ideas of Iran being a land of the Arya people, the noble people, become collided into the rising Aryan mythology that would lead to catastrophic consequences in Germany and elsewhere. Sometimes you also hear Iranians offer explanations that, well, you know, we're Caucasian because the Caucasus Mountains are very close to us. Okay, Caucasus Mountains are technically outside the borders of Iran. And let's remember that the whole Caucasian mythology, something that was developed in Göttingen, is an outdated and dismissed racial typography that divided the world into Mongoloid and Negroid human beings. Serious anthropologists no longer use kind of classifications, and neither should we. But here's the interesting thing. When you go to take a look in De Khuda, in this authoritative Persian dictionary, encyclopedia, under the word for Arya, what are the ancient Persian texts that De Khuda references? In the third line, Max Müller, the great German scholar, and a little bit further down, Da'iratul Ma'arif Britannica, Encyclopedia Britannica. So Iranians are directly referencing European sources to tell them what the definition of an Aryan is. And they come to associate the European sense of Aryan with this word Arya, from which the word Iran has been derived. Let me talk for just a couple of minutes about this. In the 19th century, we come to see the whole rise of Indo-European classification of languages. So here we have people like Sir William Jones, and of course, Anquetil de Perron, who comes up with this Aryan vocabulary. Max Müller himself, who's cited here, clearly says that his usage of Indo-European refers only to language groups. It has nothing to do with race. He says famously, to me, an ethnologist who speaks of an Aryan race, Aryan blood, Aryan eyes, and Aryan hair is a sinner. And yet, in spite of Max Müller, other people end up using classification. In the context of the 20th century, we come to see many Iranians use classification. They're using this language of an Aryan race to describe themselves. There are important books by Iranian intellectuals, Mirza Agha Khan Kermani, and Arab as being savage. So he's replicating the colonial discourse of Europe at the time. Hassan Pirnia writes a book on Tarikh Iran Qadim az Agaz ta Inqiraz Sasanian, history of ancient Iran from the beginning to the fall of the Sasanian Empire, in which he comes to include the chapter on white skin races, the Indo-Europeans. And what's so interesting is that this kind of language trickles down to textbooks. So there's a 4th grade textbook that is developed under the Pahlavi regime, identifying the people of Iran as part of the Aryan race. Aryan race. The 20th century sees many Iranians engage in patently racist anti-Arab, anti-Turkish, anti-Indian, and anti-Black language. The most famous of them is, of course, the famous Iranian author Sadiq Hidayat, who describes Arabs, and with all apologies for repeating this, as footed and savage lizard eaters. And it's not uncommon to find contemporary Iranians echoing this kind of a language. In 1934, the formal name of Iran is changed in foreign correspondence from Persia to Iran. And the reason that is given by Reza Shah is because Iran was the birthplace and origin of Aryans, and the greatness of race and civilization of ancient Iran would demand that name. It's important for us to keep in mind that when you're talking about a place like Iran, which for millennia, Macedonians and Arabs and Turks and Central Asians and Mongols and Indians and others have moved through and conquered and stayed and married, there is no such thing as race. This oftentimes disappoints my Iranian friends. Yes, there's a Persian language. Yes, we can talk about multiple strands of Iranian history and Iranian literature, but there is no Iranian race. The concept of race is a fiction, and it's ever more a fiction in a part of the world where so many people have moved through and left their imprint and their genetic makeup. Mohammad Reza Shah, the Shah in Western discourse, goes so far as to say, yes, we're Easterners, but we are Aryans. We're closer to European states than we are to Middle Eastern states. And famously, he said that an accident of history that Iran is somehow in the Middle East and not in Europe. So it's this sense of dislocated identity. And interestingly enough, Mohammad Reza Shah goes on to say that it's from Iran that the Aryan race of America and Europe have been descended, and that we are nothing like the Arabs or Semites. This kind of a division of Semitic and Indo-European begins to echo a lot of the racial and racist discourse of Europe in the 19th century. So that's the Iranian side. In the 1960s and 1970s, there are more Iranian students in America than there are students from any other country. So many of the Iranians who are in this country right now are doctors and engineers. And the reason that they're here is that in 1965, the United States changed its laws to become ever so slightly less racist. It was never give us your poor huddled masses. It was give us your doctors and engineers. Sometimes this has led Iranians to play into the mythology of the model minority community. When we are confronted with prejudice, racism, bigotry, and xenophobia, our response has been to say, no, 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 we're educated. No, 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 we're doctors. Well, it's true that some of us are doctors, but what if we're not? Should we not be a people who insist on the dignity and the nobility of all humanity, regardless of our wealth, regardless of our education? So at times, Iranians have fallen into some of the same pitfall that Asian Americans and Jewish Americans have fallen, which is trying to rise above racist treatment by playing the role of the modern model community. The treatment of Iranians in the US undergoes a profound shift after the 1979 Islamic Revolution. You have a massive backlash against Iranians, demonstrations telling Iranians, camel jockeys, and this kind of language to go home. And as a result of which, many Iranians come to emphasize and hyper-emphasize their whiteness. Their idea is just blend. If they call themselves not Muhammad but Mo, not Ali but Al, then maybe they deserve this kind of a horrific treatment. So this issue of white passing Iranians, and of course there's many biracial Iranians, racially ambiguous Iranians, comes to also see a greater rise in this context. I want to end our conversation with a reminder of how complicated the discussion of whiteness in an American legal context has been, because whiteness in America is so clearly not about phenotype. And whiteness in America is not about color. It's not just about color. So keep in mind that we have a fundamental contradiction living in a country which states that all human beings are endowed with certain inalienable rights. And in practice, the same country was founded upon two original sins: the genocide against the Native American people and 400 years of enslavement of African descendants, Jim Crow laws, and the racial prejudice that we still see on our streets till today. In March of 1790, the United States came to identify the people who qualify for citizenship as being, and I quote, free white males. Free white males. So therefore, it was of crucial interest to immigrants to this country to be able to identify as white. And starting in the early part of 1900, you've got wave after wave of Middle Eastern, North African, Indian, and Japanese and other immigrants who take court cases all the way to the Supreme Court, trying to get themselves classified as white. So in 1906, there's a Lebanese man, George Shishan, who is classified as a Mongoloid in the language of that time. And he has a trump card. Let me rephrase that. Don't want that word in my mouth. He has a winning argument. And his argument is, if I am Mongolian, then so was Jesus, for he came from the same land. And the Supreme Court is so horrified at the thought of Jesus being anything other than a white man that they grant him citizenship. What is interesting is that over the course of the next few years, even before Iranians are actually in America, various people come to America, use Iranians as an argument for why they should be classified as white. So for example, you have the case of Halajian, an Armenian who comes to America, goes to the Supreme Court and says, I'm an Armenian. Armenians are Christian. We are nothing, and I quote, those fire-worshipping Persians. Those fire-worshipping Persians should be non-white. Armenians should be white. He does not win the argument. Meanwhile, there is a Parsi, a Zoroastrian, and said, we're part of the Persian culture who migrated to India. We're still Persian, and since those Persians are Indo-European, we should also be classified as white, and they win. The ultimate point of how classification as white doesn't depend only on issues of color and phenotype is that at one point you have an Armenian who goes to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is trying to look at him and gauge whether he's white enough. And the discussion, I wish I was joking, the discussion comes down to Christology, to the theological views that the Armenian church has about the way that the human and divine nature of Christ mingle. And the Supreme Court says, okay, well, yes, the opinion of this Armenian Christology is closer to the Western Church. And therefore, we're going to classify you as white. In other words, what you're noticing is that whiteness depends on a whole set of factors. Some of them are about culture, some of them are about theology. And in 1944, the United States decide to give citizenship to a Muslim Saudi and classify him as white. And they say this is because of establishing friendlier relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia. So let's end our discussion by talking about the importance of Jimmy Baldwin. Baldwin famously says at one point that nobody is white before they come to America. They come to America and are whiteified. They undergo the process of arguing for whiteness by stepping on the backs of Black people. America becomes white, he says, by the people who settle this country in a settler colonial fashion because of the necessity of denying the Black presence and justifying Black subjugation. I think the questions that I would like to ask us as Iranians, as Iranian Americans, living in an age of Black Lives Matter, when you've got Black women and men being shot by the police on the street, is what are we gaining by arguing for a white status or checking the white box? Our silence and our being complicit will not save us. You know this from Trump's Muslim ban, and half of the people who were immediately affected by the Muslim ban were Iranians. Part of my hope is that instead we can make an argument based on justice, based on liberation, based on dignity of all of us. And rather than arguing that we are not Black and not Mongoloid and not this and that we make our argument on the basis of the dignity of what it means to be human. And I could think of no greater way than affirming the most beautiful part of what it has been to be Iranian, and to remember the words of Sadi, Bani Adam azay yekdigarand. The children of Adam are members of one body. So thank you so much for allowing me to share with you, and I look forward to taking your questions.